I'd like to invite you to join with me in the spirit of meditation and prayer, followed by some shared silence. I invite you to get yourself comfortable in your seat and plant your feet firmly on the ground. And turn inward with me now. I heard a poem this week about 12,000 eggs, a woman, and extravagance. Apparently, soaking the skin of your hand in eggs is healing, nourishing, even luxurious. Who would have thought? But if this is true, well then, why settle for just a hand? That's what this woman thought. So there she sat in her bathroom, surrounded by 100 cartons of eggs, which she then, one by one, delicately, intentionally, even prayerfully cracked, and filled her bathtub to the rim. With the words yippee, she slid her entire body in. Extravagant, the poem called it. Extravagant. And then the poem went on to teach that it comes from two Latin words, extra, meaning outside, and vagary, meaning to wander. So, to wander outside the boundaries, to be unrestrained, to liberate oneself. To let our passions finally take us, guide us, to a place that is new, a place that lets us immerse fully, a place that does not ask us to hold back, hide. And so in this month of liberation, and in this moment of pausing to take quiet notice of our lives, how can we not ask ourselves, where is the liberation in our living? Where in all that is so restrained is the unrestrained? Where are we allowing ourselves to wander outside the boundaries? Where in our lives do we jump all in? It's not really about the eggs, or just trying something new, or spoiling ourselves. Of course not. It's about noticing when the lines have become a fence, when our schedule has become a box, when the routine has become a prison. It's about wandering over the line to save yourself, even find it. It's about liberation. So friends, what in your life is wanting you to jump all in? With that question, let us enter into silence together. May the silence we have shared continue to hold and heal us all. Amen. I want to start today with a reading from a guy named Fred Maramarco. He wrote something called A Recipe for Unhappiness. And I want to share it with you. I want to see whether or not you have some of these ingredients that ring true for you. Recipe for unhappiness. 1 cup of what is. 1 cup of inability to accept what is. 3 tablespoons of complaints. 1 teaspoon of light whining. 1/4 pound of alternate scenario, preferably unattainable. 1 bunch of actual reality. 1 pint of idealized worldview. 2 teaspoons of perfection, And finally, 4 sprigs of envy minced for garnish. Now, you take all of that into a large bowl, you whisk it together of what is with an equal amount of inability to accept what is. You stir in complaints and let sit until brooding and sulking occur. Then you add a dash of light whining, especially in the company of friends, but be careful not to over-season or they won't hang around, actually. In a separate bowl, add alternate scenario to actual reality from your garden and separate leaves from stems. Then try to reattach leaves in exact pattern that existed before separation. Pour in idealized worldview and process in food processor. When mixture is pureed, add to what is an ability to accept what is, and then blend. Add exactly 2 teaspoons of perfection and let stand until tears form. Garnish with minced envy and serve immediately. Here ends this morning's reading. There's a Christian author, Israel Ayavor, who writes this. You have the right to suppress yourself, oppress yourself, and depress yourself. You also have the right to impress yourself and let yourself feel happy too. There's something perfectly balanced about that quote, right? It's both critical and kind, confrontational and inspirational. It honors the fact that there are bars that hem us in, but it also invites us to notice when the key is setting right there in the lock. Lately, I feel like I've been trying to chase happiness a little bit, and I'm wondering if I am missing the key in the lock right in front of me. So I've kind of gone on this little journey of like, where is happiness? How do I get more of it in my life? What am I missing here? And I found something that surprised me, that blocks all of us in this pursuit of happiness, actually. You know, like kind of not seeing that key in the lock far more than we might think. And here it is. Are you ready? Mean people make us miserable. That's it. That's my revelation. And while we don't need polls to tell us, they have actually. Survey after survey confirms that personal conflict is the #1 source of daily unhappiness. It's not the state of American politics, although that can be depressing. Not the unstable job market, that too can be depressing. Not the pain for our kids' college and how are we going to be able to do that. Not even the crisis in Syria or economic justice. But fights with our spouse, conflict with our boss, rude neighbors, inconsiderate cousins, power-hungry coworkers, entitled children. Apparently, I'm the only one who has teenagers who are. In other words, mean people, right? If it weren't for them, oh man, life would be such a joy. We'd all feel liberated. And in naming this, we don't need really to be overly judgmental, right? After all, it's not that they're evil. They just have these deep character flaws about them that they can't really see. I mean, poor things. So we need to help them. We need to fix them. Show them the error of their ways. Heal our happiness by getting them to see how flawed they really are. Not that hard. But before we go there this morning, I think it's important to pause and share a few stories with you. First one is a story of Scott. Now, Scott's my husband, a Unitarian minister himself, and he was in graduate school in Chicago, and he also was working at the time, and he tells a story of right near where he parked at his apartment, there was a big brick wall, and often where he'd park, the sign on the wall said this. You've got to go with my makeshift little said this. You see it? Tom's Boiled Food. Now, I gotta tell you, Scott was like, Tom's Boiled Food? Have you ever heard of a restaurant that had boiled food? And he was just like, kind of on this thing about boiled food, and he'd talk to everybody about Tom's Boiled Food, like, we should go there, we should check it out. What do you mean boiled food? And he went to his coworkers, and actually he got chewed out by a few of his coworkers who were like, are you an elitist? You know, like, not everybody can afford the cooking things that you have, so, you know, stop being so snobby. Scott was like, oh, okay, maybe that's a good point. Like when I go camping, you know, I can make oatmeal and poached eggs, and, you know, you could even put chicken in there, I suppose, right? So he's thinking through this whole thing, and then he's thinking, you know, like, actually, maybe it's an Irish restaurant, right? You boil everything in Irish food. Yeah, right? Corned beef and cabbage and potatoes and all that stuff. So anyway, he'd go to parties, and he would tell people about Tom's Boiled Food, and people would be really skeptical about the whole thing. And he was like, no, it's really, you know, it's a thing. Then his brother comes to town, and he's telling his brother about Tom's Boiled Food. And he's like, we gotta go. We gotta show up. And he parks the car, and he drives in, and for the first time ever, he looks at what the sign really says. When he told me that story, I laughed at him so hard. I thought that was the funniest thing ever. Until this happened to me. So we're driving to church together at First Unitarian, and we were coming in off of 490, and up in front of me is this enormous sign. And I was in a terrible spot about this sign. Now, I might have been able to, like, roll it back a little bit. If I hadn't just returned from Albany with Planned Parenthood when I was talking to senators about, you know, reproductive rights issues, and I had just gone to this ministers' meeting where I was the only female minister there, and I kind of got disrespected and talked down to. So when I saw this billboard, I was livid. I mean, livid. So I'm driving by myself, I'm in the car, and here's what I saw. Oh, would you be ticked off? I mean, come on. All right, so I get home. Can you read it? Yeah. It says, gentlemen, start your engines. Days in brand new high performance beds. And I was like, you've got to be kidding. Right, so I get home and I go through this long thing with Scott. I'm like, we have to form a petition. I'm calling up my girlfriends. I'm like, you would not believe how sexist that is. And I'm going on and on and on. And Scott goes, all right, I believe you, dear. And then we drive to work. And this is what he read. Okay, it's a little sexist, but not nearly what I was thinking, right? Like, gentlemen get randy, right? Okay? It was such a great, like, So here's the thing. It's one of my favorite quotes. It's one of the most important kind of pieces of psychological and spiritual wisdom there is. It comes from the French writer Anais Nin. She says this: we do not see things as they are, but as we are. We do not see things as they are, but as we are. That's the reminder that my billboard in Scott's boiled food kind of screams out. And we do need reminding because we forget about it all the time. We want to believe that we see clearly and judge accurately and fairly and objectively, that we see things as they really are. Sure, some people are cursed kind of with blind spots, but not us. It's other people whose perceptions and perspectives are biased and kind of filtered. It's those other less aware and self-reflective people to see what they want to see, who twist reality to fit their preferred storylines, not us, ever. But there's a great study that I came across. So researchers took two groups, and they gave them a swatch of color, like a paint swatch of color, right? They had them look at it for one group. They had look at that paint swatch for 5 seconds. And then they gave them 30 seconds to kind of describe the color as a way of remembering what it was, right? Actually, I'm going to go back to the first group. I skipped one. So the first group, they had them look at the color, and then they gave them 30 seconds. Then they gave them 6 swatches of color, and they were supposed to pick out the right color in that time, right? Turns out 75% of the people could pick out the right color, which is a little surprising after 30 seconds, right? But still, 75%. Second group, they did exactly what I started with here. They gave them the swatch of color, and then in that, for 5 seconds, then in that 30 seconds, they had them describe what the color looked like in order to help remember it. Now, only 33% of those people got the color right. Turns out their descriptions and stories actually impaired their memory and perception rather than improved it. The conclusion, which could also be seen as the conclusion of my billboard experience, was that we don't see and remember things as they are. We see and remember things through our stories. Stories which, like my conversation with Scott and my girlfriends, took place quite apart from the actual thing I was describing and analyzing. Stories that are about our stuff much more than they are about the world out there. So here's another study, one that fits and helps analyze my misperception. This study was a virtual kind of candid camera episode. Remember that show? I don't know, they may still have it on. Anyway, a person is dressed like a stereotypical researcher in a lab coat and has one of those plastic doohickey things in their pocket. Don't you like my very articulate description of, you know what I'm talking about, right? The pen thing. And they have on black glasses and a clipboard in front of them. And they are on college campuses. So this person that's dressed in a lab coat, they stop students on campus and they ask them to tell them where a certain science building is. So while they are asking them to describe where the science building is, these two construction workers kind of rudely move right in between the conversation. And they are carrying this big kind of flat piece of wood that is opaque, so you can't see through it. And they walk right through. Well, it turns out that the researcher that was originally asking the question walks off with the workers, and a new one had walked in right at the same time. Now, when they're done, right in front of that student is somebody who has, they're exactly dressed the same, right? Same black rimmed glasses, same lab coat, same plastic doohickey thing, same clipboard, except this person is entirely of a different height, build, hair color, and voice. Half of them noticed that it was a different person. Half. The conclusion of that study, we never, no matter what we tell ourselves, actually see the entire picture. When we remember, interpret, and judge an event right in front of us, our brains only latch onto a few key details, right? We are quite literally oblivious to the rest. And the way we determine which of those details to latch onto and which to ignore just like the details that I latched onto and chose to ignore in my own self-righteousness about the whole thing, has almost nothing to do with the reality in front of us, but the emotional reality that we bring actually to the thing that we are observing. And so the message is not just that our preconceptions distort things, it's also that we never, again, no matter what we tell ourselves, we never look at the whole thing. So if we can't see billboards and restaurant signs and swatches of color clearly, I think that we may want to reconsider our assumption that we're great at seeing people clearly. Which brings us back to those mean people that make us miserable. Again, we're sympathetic, right? It's not that we are deeming any of them bad people. It's not about morality as much as a character problem. It's their darn personality flaws. That's what leads to them giving us a hard time. That's what over and over again starts the fight. That's what needs to be fixed. It's absolutely as plain as day. That husband of ours was just born insensitive. He is never, ever going to remember our anniversary. Scott's not here to defend himself. Same with that boss of ours, right? The hunger for power is clearly in her genes. That's why she never delegates to us and always micromanages. She's got control issues. And, you know, that neighbor, always giving us a hard time, but he's got anger issues. That's his thing. Simply put, these people are just problems. The problem, in fact. The clear cause of so much of our unhappiness. But there's another inconvenient study. Actually, numerous inconvenient studies, all adding up to probably the most agreed upon conclusion about human perception that there is. We don't treat others like we treat ourselves, and thus we see them as worse than they are, more often than not. Let me give you a few more details. In study after study, no matter how they look at it with different strategies and scenarios, researchers have shown that we judge the troublesome behavior of others, we always attribute, almost always, to their character. But when we turn instead and judge ourselves on our own bad behavior, well, then we almost always attribute it to the unfortunate circumstances. Any of you see this playing out sometimes? When they make the mess, it's their sick personality that needs fixing. When we slip up, then suddenly it's a sick situation that needs addressed. And I need to be clear. It's not really our hypocrisy I'm trying to point out this morning. It's more the fact that we don't give our self-defined enemies a break. Like Scott ignoring the R in broiled, we seem bred by evolution to leave out the very thing that would enable us not only to understand them, but to understand them sympathetically. And we know how it turns out, right? It seems people tend to feel we've treated them unfairly when we simplistically blame everything about the problem on their personality rather than acknowledging the situation that surrounds them. What a shock. So they end up getting even more mad at us. And now suddenly we're in a fight, not just over the original thing, but also over the fact that we're not treating them fairly about the original thing. Of course, continuing with our tendency to blame everything on one's personality, we confidently tell ourselves is really just them being defensive, almost pathologically unable to accept responsibility for their own actions. A few of you are smiling, a lot of you aren't. But no matter, friends, we all know this dance, all of us do. It's not one that ends swimmingly. In fact, it rarely does end. We all just end up stuck and mad at each other for being unfair and blind and very unhappy. So given all of that, here's my question. Could it be that our daily unhappiness is not really the result of all those mean people, as much as a tendency to see others as worse than they actually are? What's really the problem? Their personality or our perception? Now don't worry, really. I've had too many rude neighbors and power-hungry bosses to completely let them off the hook, right? Indeed, I've been too rude and power-hungry myself to deny that there's not something twisted about all of this a little bit. I'm not suggesting really an either-or today. But I am saying that just like our bad behavior, the behavior of others has a whole lot more to do with the context than their character. And if we can see that and proceed with that in mind, we will all, I think, be a whole lot happier. Another way to put this is to say that the road to happiness is much different than we thought, actually. Rather than recognizing the worthlessness of others, maybe we need to get better at recognizing our tendency to blame. Rather than eliminating mean people from our lives, maybe our happiness depends instead on extending to them the same understanding that we extend to ourselves. Aristotle wrote, "Anyone can be angry. That's easy. But to be angry with the right person, to the right degree, at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, that's not easy. That is a task for human beings at their best. We're all struggling with things that we can't see and are easy to miss. We're all trying to do our best, usually under wildly complicated and often overwhelming circumstances. That doesn't mean we should be excused when we mess up, but neither does it mean that our mess-ups tell the entire story. Simply put, we need to be a bit more gentle and compassionate with one another. And if we are, I suspect that we'll be a lot less miserable and a little more liberated and a lot more happy. May it be so. Amen. Would you please join hands for the closing words as we recite our chalice extinguishing words? We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Thank you. I have a coworker who I'm going through submissions.
Join us for worship every Sunday at 10 a.m. at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canandaigua, a welcoming congregation. We are located at 3024 Cooley Road, 4 miles west of South Main Street, Canandaigua, just north of the intersection with Routes 5 and 20. Look for the blue signs just before the turn. Your comments about this program or questions about the church are welcome at 585-396-1370 or at our website, www.canandaiguauu.org. Producer and editor, Daniel Brigham.